Hello everyone, how's it going? Jeremy Langlois coming to you live from Houmas House Estate and Gardens. And I am here in the main house itself, right next to our beautiful Christmas tree, one of two here. If you're able to get out during this holiday season and come out to Houmas House if you're nearby, now is the time to do it because the decorations are here just absolutely beautiful, and it's really something great to see. Whenever we come and take a tour here, you know, we do small group tours following all our safety precautions. We would love to have you here. But I want to go ahead and just start getting cooking, and then we'll talk more about it as we go. We're doing a dish today, a Réveillon dish. I'll talk more about that in a second, but it's this oyster stew and pastries. And what I have going on in my black iron pot is I got this turned up hot, even the oil's starting to smoke, which we'd love to see. And we're going to start by making a roux. I got a 3/4 of a cup of oil in here, just regular salad oil. I'm going to go in with the same amount, 3/4 of a cup of flour, and I'm going to get this right in. And this is the longest part of the dish, so I want to go ahead and get it cooking. We go right into the pot, that hot oil with the flour going in. And what I always want you to do, if you watch my gumbo demo where we made a roux for that as well, one thing we always want to be careful about is when you throw that that flour into that hot oil, you're going to get a little poof of steam because flour is hygroscopic, meaning it holds moisture. So when it hits that hot oil, you're going to get a bunch of steam, and you want to be real careful with that with your hands because steam can very easily burn you. Also, you'll notice I'm using a whisk as opposed to a spoon at the moment. I'm going to switch to the spoon, but every time as a safety precaution, when I'm making roux, I always use a whisk because if you use a spoon, you're going to be constantly stirring throughout this process. And what you don't want to do is with a spoon, it's very easy for this hot oil to splash on your hands and burn you. We don't want that. This is all meant to be fun. We don't want no one getting hurt. And plus, as a chef, I can show you my battle scars. I got burns all over my arms and wrists, and they're not fun. So let's talk about what we're making today. We got our roux going. I do like to show you, I like using the spoon for comparison. Look, we're making a dark roux, so we're starting out right now, and we're just getting started, still a blonde roux. The roux itself is very similar to the color of the spoon. We want to get that about the color of peanut butter. So, oyster stew. This is a classic dish in New Orleans during the time of Réveillon. Now, what is Réveillon? Réveillon was a dining tradition from the French word meaning to awaken. And it's a tradition in the 1800s in New Orleans where heavily dominated by Catholic religion. And one of the things they would do is they would fast during Christmas Eve, leading up to midnight mass. So you would fast the whole day on Christmas Eve. You would then go to midnight mass, and then when you would get home, they would actually start Christmas early. At 2 o'clock in the morning, arriving home from mass, they would have this Réveillon dinner or this awakening dinner. And the tradition kind of died off by about the 1940s. However, there's still several restaurants to this day in New Orleans that during the holiday season that they will continue to serve their Réveillon menus. And it had a lot of different interesting foods such as game meat pies, such as brandy milk and coffee punch. You would have this whole spread of different foods, but one of the classics in New Orleans would be oysters and pastry shells. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it, but the way I like doing it is making an oyster stew that you serve in these pastry shells. So it's very similar to starting off with a gumbo. What's great is our roux is starting to come together quickly. If you remember earlier, I showed you, and it was about the color of this spoon. Now look at it. The roux itself is starting to darken to, now it's much darker. It's about that color of the peanut butter. It's much darker here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add our onion, celery, and bell pepper to this hot roux. What I always do, I was using the whisk. Now I switch to my spoon, and I'm going to get some of this in here. That's going to start to cook. And what's great about adding these onion, celery, and bell pepper, first of all, look what I'm doing here, y'all. I'm just using that. You know, I love showing simple alternatives to some of the things we do. Of course, here at the restaurant, we're always cutting all our vegetables, but there's no reason you can't go to the store. A lot of markets here locally in Louisiana, because we use so much onion, celery, and bell pepper, that trinity all the time, you can find them chopped up in the stores, and I just want to show you for this demo, I'm just doing that right there. And as we add this to it, these vegetables are actually going to darken this roux one step more. And the reason for that is because we had an onion, celery, bell pepper. Well, the onions have a high amount of sugar. So by adding it to that hot roux, the sugars in those onions actually caramelize and darken themselves, and some of that color imparts itself to the roux. So that makes the roux a little bit darker. I like to add my onion, celery, bell pepper first, then come back with my garlic. So that's the garlic's going in now. And the reason for that is minced garlic can sometimes burn real fast. So whenever you add the Trinity first, it kind of, because that has water content to it, it kind of cools down that hot roux mixture we have here. And then we add the garlic a step later, just because it can burn so fast. I just wait a second. You could probably throw it in if you keep stirring, but just as a little safety precaution, we put that in there then. Everybody with me? Now look at this. This is Cajun gold right here. Look, we got some, that's just a nice, beautiful dark roux. You can decide how dark you want your roux. I like to take this roux, since it's just going to be oysters, I take it just a shade lighter than I would for my gumbo. I like a nice dark roux whenever I make my gumbo. However, that's up to you. All right, so now we're at the point where we're going to add some liquid. So first, you could add water, you could add stock, but we're doing oysters. Now, when you get oysters, typically, they're going to come and they're going to have a lot of juice in them. Now, that's great flavor. So what I first start with is I want to add about 2 quarts of liquid to this, but first I want to add as much juice as I have possible as part of that measurement. So I'm going to start by just putting some of this juice in, and guess what? I'm even going to let a couple of these oysters drop in there as well. And what that's going to do, because we are going to add these oysters in right at the end, because oysters only take a moment to cook. However, getting a couple in, I call it a sacrifice to the food gods. Adding a couple of oysters in early, they'll actually, although they will probably cook down to nothing, that's okay, because we're going to get a lot of flavor from that. So I started with the oyster liquid. Now I'm switching to a little bit of seafood stock, which this is a shrimp stock. If you go to the stores, any broth would be fantastic. As opposed to just using water, you could use chicken stock is absolutely fine. Vegetable stock, absolutely fine at this point. But since this is seafood based, of course, seafood should be your go-to. A little shrimp stock, a little chicken stock, that's all we're going to do. And as part of our roux techniques is anytime, whether we're making gumbo or this stew, what we want to do is we're starting off with that roux, we add some liquid, we stir. We add some liquid, we stir. We don't dump all the liquid in. We don't just blindly follow the recipe and it says 2 quarts and just dump all that 2 quarts in, because roux thickens at different levels depending on how dark you got it. So all we want to do is add the stock in, stir it into the roux, and then let it come up to a boil and see how thick it is. And you want it to come up to a boil because roux doesn't reach its true thickening potential until it boils. It has to boil to thicken. So we add some stock in, stir it in until we get it to the thickness that we want it. And then once I get it to the thickness that I want it to be, I will actually add just a hair more, because what's going to happen? We're going to cook this for a little bit. Well, what's happening as we're cooking? We see steam coming out. This is reducing. So as steam evaporates into the air, this mixture is actually cooking down a little bit. So it's going to thicken just by reducing. Also, at the end when we add the oysters, well, oysters are like 99% water. So adding all those oysters in at the end will actually thin this down as well. So we want it just to cook down a little bit and be nice and thick. Now we're at a point where we made our roux, we have our stock in. I'm going to add a little bit of chopped parsley, a little bit of some sliced green onions. I'm going to go ahead and start to season it. Season it how you like. Hot sauce would be great right now. If you like it spicy, this would be a great time to go in with your hot sauce. But I'm just keeping it simple with a little bit of salt and pepper. This is our base, and you would want to let this cook for about 20 or 30 minutes. So we're just going to let that go. Get this stuff off to the side. Now we're going to make some pastry shells and talk about our pastry shells. So we're making vol au vents. I just love saying vol au vent, and vol au vent in French, literal translation is wind blown, meaning we're making these nice flaky shells. So let's get this out of the way and let me show you what we're working with here. You can go a couple different routes. Again, I love offering alternatives. I went to the store, normally we buy puff pastry and we get them in these sheets, but you can go to the store and buy puff pastry sheets, or they actually sell exactly what we're looking for, these shells. So if you're able to go and just buy these pre-punched out shells, perfect. Those are going to be fantastic. You could definitely use those. It would be great for this recipe. But if you want to just make these yourself, well, we can do it a couple different ways. First of all, I got 2 cookie cutters, one bigger and one a little bit smaller. That's important. All I'm going to do is watch what I'm doing here. I'm going to punch out 2 at this shape. Then I'm going to come back. Because I want these to really puff up and be nice and big, this is just a beaten egg with a pastry brush. This egg wash is our glue. I'm going to take the 2 pieces I made and I'm going to put them directly on top of each other and lightly push them down. Then I'm going to take this smaller cookie cutter and I'm not going to push all the way down, but I'm just going to give it a little pinch. And look what I got here. So now I cut through the pastry and then I just gave it a little pinch. What's going to happen is after this bakes, we're going to easily be able to take that down. Let's do one more just so we're all on the same page. Look, our stew is simmering away here perfectly. Of course, like everything, guys, my friend Jessie's behind the camera. She has a phone on her. If you have any questions, leave a comment in our on here. Hit that share button. We love it when you hit the share button. Hope y'all are all having a great holiday and Christmas season. Again, double up on top. Just crimp it with here, and now I have a couple of these good to go. And if you're saying, Jeremy, I don't have all these fancy cookie cutters at home. Well, what am I supposed to do? Well, no problem. All we're going to do is you can do the same thing with a knife. You could cut it circularly, or you don't have to cut it into circles as well. You can actually cut squares. I'm going to cut 2 squares, paint the bottom layer, put it on top, and then just carefully take that knife and just go in a little, and then give it that little crimp or that little indentation right here. And then that would bake up the same thing. Let's get this excess out of the way. And so look what I got here. So we got a couple different versions of the shells ready to go. We got some pre-made ones, which are at the store. Fantastic. It's just puff pastry that's poked out and ready to go. We got some we made ourselves. That you can make them as big as you want, or you could just bake them off in squares as well, or just put a slight punch in the middle. Right before we bake them, you want to set your oven to 400 degrees. These need to bake at a high heat because actually what's going to happen is it's going to get a great color on the outside, and it's actually, there's no yeast in this dough. How puff pastry works, it's these thousands of layers of flour and butter, and as that butter melts, it actually starts to steam and rise and make this beautiful flaky pastry. Another thing you could do to really have this great, you could put it in the oven just like this and you'll be fine, 400-degree oven for about 10 minutes. However, I like to paint the top of it with this egg as well, and that's going to give it this really beautiful crust and color on the outside. So this is going to caramelize up really nicely in the oven as it bakes. You just got to watch it because it'll go from brown to burnt very quickly. About 10 minutes, just keep an eye on it. Again, 400-degree oven, pop it in the oven, and look what we got here. These are some of the pre-made ones that we had, and they baked up perfectly. After about 4 minutes, they bake up to all these different shapes, and I just think they look great. So what we want to do is after they baked, the reason we did that punch in the middle, Jessie's raised her hand. She's got a question for someone in the comments. What you got, Jess?
Annie said if she has a convection oven, does the temperature need to be different?
Great question. Rule of thumb, you could probably leave it the same, but as a good rule of thumb, if you're following a recipe and it says bake in oven and you want to use the most 9 times out of 10, your recipes are going to be kind of calibrated to a traditional non-convection oven. So what you want to do is anytime, if you want to use the convection settings, I typically lower the temperature 25 degrees. So if it says bake at 400 degrees, I would just lower it to 375 degrees and then follow everything the same. Great question, Annie. So this is what they look like when they come out. And then now what we want to do is, the reason we just gave it a little pinch there is now I'm going to take my knife and just kind of follow this, and it's going to make this great little hole that will just kind of pop out real easy. Look at that. Just right there where that pinch is, it just comes out easy. And then I even take and, well, I like to kind of hollow it out and remove some of this. So we have these really empty, kind of beautiful shells that are great and flaky, and these are just perfect for what we're doing. But look, they just pop right out whenever you put that little indentation there. So I'm going to get my plate. Let's go ahead and put 2 of these shells just on here. Now to finish the soup, we want to come back and check it for seasoning. I say soup, this oyster stew. And then if you were preparing this ahead of time, you can make these shells a day before. You can make this stew early ahead of time, and then right before you're ready to serve it, bring it up to a boil, and we're just going to put these oysters right in here. They only need to cook for about a minute, y'all. Whenever the sides start to curl, they're perfectly cooked. Well, the last thing you want to do with these oysters is overcook them. Whenever you overcook oysters, they shrink up, and we don't want that. So just let them come in, and this is a perfect time to taste it for seasoning. See if you want to come back with a little bit of more salt, a little more pepper. Just rules of thumb that I like to do is I like to add salt till I taste salt, and I like to add pepper till I taste pepper, and then I stop. Because the last thing you want to do is make it too salty. Stir that in there, and this is good to go. You know, I love dishes like this. They're really soulful, and I love a dish like this, which we're going to be serving at Houmas house for dinner this Friday and Saturday. You know, it's a perfect dish for doing here because I love food with a story, and I love that this is of the Réveillon era, you know, this great tradition in New Orleans. And what I do is I just ladle in and try to get as much of these oysters as I can and just ladle them right in and then let some of that extra juice fill up the holes in these shells. And this makes a great appetizer or a great entree. We serve it as an appetizer. Just get as many of those beautiful oysters in there. And I just love these traditions that it's one of my favorite things about Louisiana cooking is not only is it great food with a story, but Louisiana food has such a great history. And coming to Houmas house, there's such a great history here, and we love sharing that with all of our guests. So again, we'll be serving that this week. Hope everybody has a great holiday season. I know I'm about to be eating me a little bit of oyster stew. Can't pass that up. We'll see y'all next week. Thank you, guys.